Good morning. We are looking at writing today, and our subject is constructing complex sentences. So these are our aims and outcomes this morning. By the end of the session, you must be able to, state what clear, concise and precise writing is, know the different formats for different document types, plan your writing and proofread your work. You should be able to try and use clear, concise and precise writing, know how much detail to use and know typical lengths of certain documents. You could employ all of the above to achieve high quality of clarity and format. And when you do your level 2 assessment, they will be looking at your ability to communicate information, ideas and opinions clearly, coherently and effectively, and to write text of an appropriate level of detail and of appropriate length to meet the needs of purpose and audience. So this is what we are looking at this morning. Why is sentence structure important? At level 2, you are expected to use complex sentences accurately and consistently. So you should be able to see them throughout your writing. This skill will build on your ability to write simple and compound sentences that would have been expected at lower levels of functional skills. So if you'd have been doing level 1. So you can see there the 3 sentence types that make the level 2 expectation. Let's have a look at those complex sentences. We are going to watch a video, so I will just share that with you.
A complex sentence is a complete sentence with one or more subordinate clauses. A subordinate clause has a verb and a subject, but doesn't form a complete sentence on its own, and relies on the main sentence for its meaning. Subordinate clauses begin with words such as although,
if,
after,
when,
and unless. If the subordinate clause appears before the main sentence, it usually has a comma after it. If it appears after the main clause, you'll generally not need a comma. The subordinate clause can also appear in the middle of the main sentence. If the subordinate clause provides non-essential information, it's separated with a pair of commas. If the subordinate clause is essential to the understanding of the rest of the sentence, commas are not required.
Oh, just hold on. I'm just going to start the video again because I had an issue there with my computer. So apologies for that. For some reason that box popped up and I couldn't get rid of it. Anyway, it's gone now. So let's try again.
A complex sentence is a complete sentence with one or more subordinate clauses. A subordinate clause has a verb and a subject, but doesn't form a complete sentence on its own, and relies on the main sentence for its meaning. Subordinate clauses begin with words such as although,
if,
after,
when,
and unless. If the subordinate clause appears before the main sentence, it usually has a comma after it. If it appears after the main clause, you'll generally not need a comma. The subordinate clause can also appear in the middle of the main sentence. If the subordinate clause provides non-essential information, it's separated with a pair of commas. If the subordinate clause is essential to the understanding of the rest of the sentence, commas are not required. The clause is essential because we need to know which children are going on holiday.
To recap, a complex sentence is a complete sentence with one or more subordinate clauses. The subordinate clause can appear at the beginning of the sentence with a comma, or at the end of the sentence without. It can also appear in the middle of the sentence, with commas if it is non-essential, and without commas if it is essential to the understanding of the sentence.
Okay. Identifying sentence types. So as we've seen in the video, a simple sentence contains a subject, a verb and an object, and it will make sense on its own. So for example, I worked in a shop. A compound sentence is two simple sentences which have been joined together using a conjunction. So conjunction, words like but, and, so, things like that. I worked in a shop, but next month I start a new job in a leisure centre. So if we take out the but and replace it with a full stop, we could have two simple sentences. Using the but makes it into a compound sentence. A complex sentence has a main clause and at least one subordinate clause. So the main clause will make sense on its own. I worked in a shop. That would make sense on its own as a simple sentence, but the subordinate clause does not make sense on its own. It is not a sentence on its own. After I left college, that does not make sense on its own. Okay, so complex sentence, main clause, and at least one subordinate clause. So let's have a look at simple sentence composition. We have a subject, I, the verb, worked, and an object, shop. I worked in a shop. So that is your basic simple sentence. A subject, a verb, and an object, and it will make sense on its own. So looking now at compound sentence composition. This is two simple sentences joined together with a conjunction. So our first simple sentence, I worked in a shop, then the conjunction, which here is the word but, and our second simple sentence, next month I start a new job in a leisure centre. Any questions so far? Okay, moving on. Let's look at our complex sentence composition. which will contain a main clause and at least one subordinate clause. And remember, the subordinate clause will not make sense on its own. So in this sentence, subordinate clause is after I left college, and the main clause, I worked in a shop. So that main clause, I worked in a shop, could make sense on its own. So let's have a look at these sentences and see if you can identify the sentence type. Is it a complex, compound, or a simple sentence? The cafe was busy. What type of sentence is that?
Simple.
Good. It's a simple sentence. Although the cafe was busy, the waitress managed to serve all of the customers. So we can see it's
Complex.
Yeah. Yes, complex sentence. So we've got the main clause, the waitress managed to serve all of the customers, which would make sense on its own. But we've also got the subordinate clause, although the cafe was busy. So it is a complex sentence. The cafe shuts at 5 p.m.
Simple.
Simple sentence, good. The cafe was busy because the cakes were very popular.
Where did you go yesterday?
The cafe was busy because the cakes were very popular.
Complex.
Complex.
So this one isn't a complex, this is a compound sentence. It's been joined by the word because, or sorry, they've been joined. So the cafe was busy, the cakes were very popular. Both of those could be simple sentences on their own. They have been joined together to make a compound sentence with the word because. Okay, any questions about that? So when it's complex, there would be a subordinate clause, which doesn't make sense on its own. But those two simple sentences would make sense on their own. We've joined them with because, the conjunction. Okay, moving on. The cafe shuts at 5 p.m.
Simple.
Simple, good. The cafe, which is on the main square, shuts at 5 p.m.
Complex.
Good. Well done. Excellent. Okay. Complex sentences and subordinate clauses. So here we have an example of a complex sentence. The cafe, which is on the main square, shuts at 5 p.m. The main idea of a sentence is called the main clause, and it makes sense on its own. So if you look at the bottom, we can see the main clause here is the cafe. Shuts at 5 p.m. So it's been split, but that main clause is there that would make sense on its own. The cafe shuts at 5 p.m. The additional information is called the subordinate clause, and it does not make sense on its own, which is on the main square. So that doesn't make sense on its own. And as in this example, if a subordinate clause is splitting the main clause, then you would need to use commas to show the boundaries. So you'd need one before the subordinate clause and after, if it's splitting the main clause. So let's look at these sentences and identify the main and subordinate clauses. So the main clause, it could make sense on its own. the subordinate clause, it does not make sense on its own. The first sentence, before opening the cafe, Hannah empties the bins.
Before opening the cafe, that's a subordinate.
Good. So that one is the subordinate clause.
It is the main.
Yeah.
Hannah empties.
Well done. Hannah owns the cafe, which is always busy. So Hannah owns the cafe. Is that main or subordinate?
Main.
Good. So that's the main clause. And which is always busy. It wouldn't make sense on its own. It's a
Subordinate
subordinate
clause.
clause. So let's look at the next sentence. Hannah, comma, who runs the cafe, comma, needs to hire more staff. So those two commas show us that the main clause has been split. So which are the main parts and which is the subordinate?
Anna needs to hire more staffs.
Good. So is that main or subordinate?
Main.
Good. Well done. So there are main clauses, which means this is the subordinate clause. Finally, Matthew, who is in college, has a part-time job at the cafe.
Matthew.
Matthew has a part-time job at the cafe. Main clause.
Good. Which means
Who is in the college? Subordinate.
Subordinate clause. Good. Well done. Anybody got any questions about the main and subordinate clauses? Okay. Why do we use complex sentences? In functional skills level 2 writing, you will get marks for showing you can use complex sentences. And we use them because they're good for explaining things precisely and in detail. So the subordinate clause adds additional information. So adds detail and precision to your sentence. Good writers will form complex sentences to combine ideas and to make their writing more interesting and effective. If you always wrote in simple sentences, then your writing would sound very monotonous, it wouldn't be interesting. It would sound quite boring, a bit robotic as well, if they were the only types of sentences you used. Of course, you do need to use simple sentences as well. What we would be looking for is a mixture, simple, compound and complex sentences. But you definitely will need to show that you can use complex sentences as well as the other two in level 2. So let's look at this example from a letter of complaint. I was disappointed. The goods I had paid for failed to arrive on time. I was disappointed when the goods I had paid for failed to arrive on time. So it's added more detail when they were disappointed. And they can be used as well, complex sentences, to stress importance. When one idea is more important than another, you can put the most important one last, and then the reader will remember it. After paying for next day delivery, I was devastated that the goods failed to arrive on time. So the reader is left with that thought of how devastated about the goods you are because they failed to arrive on time. So that's our reasons for using complex sentences. So any questions about complex sentences? Okay, so the best way to practice this is to, first of all, whenever you're reading, see if you can recognise them. So how many can you spot in what you're reading, whether it's a news website or a newspaper in the morning or a novel, whatever it is that you're reading, you should be able to spot some. And then once you are able to spot them easily, you can use them yourself in your own writing. If you are doing some writing or you're doing some writing practice, see if any simple sentences you could put some more detail in to make them into complex sentences. It's all about practice. So let's look at our quiz. What is a complex sentence? So which one of those tells us what a complex sentence is?
D. The sentence
D,
with the main.
good. Yes. Yeah, well done. A sentence with a main and at least one subordinate clause. At level 2 writing, you need to be able to form what? So is it simple sentences, compound sentences, complex sentences, or all of them?
Yeah.
Yeah, all of them. Well done. So it's A. A sentence with a main clause and a subordinate clause is known as what?
Complex sentence.
Good, complex sentence. A main clause can't make sense on its own, always has a comma, can make sense on its own, or should come first.
C. Can make sense on its own.
C. It can make sense on its own. The main clause will always make sense on its own. What about a subordinate clause? It doesn't make sense on its own. It can appear at the beginning, middle, or end of a sentence. It gives extra detail, or all of the others.
D.
Good, it's D. All of those things can describe a subordinate clause. Okay, so a shorter session today. If you log on to Moodle, which is the online learning platform for UK Versity, there are some practice activities and you can have a look at some more complex sentences. You should also practice writing some as well. And also, I have recommended before, I don't know if anyone was in those sessions, but if you look on the BBC Bite Size and search for functional skills, there is an English section. Some of it's level 1, but you'll be able to see there's also some level 2 activities as well. So that's another way that you can practice. So thanks very much for your contributions this morning. Does anyone have any questions before we finish today? Okay, well, have a good day, everybody. And I hopefully will see you on Saturday next week for our reading session.
Have a good day.
Thank you. Have a good day.
Bye.
Bye now.